So we're on our 98th Wednesday webinar. We like to do some back to basics. The team always like to do some back to basics webinars, and we generally do some back to basics things around theory and around reflection. And I was thinking, we've done almost 100 webinars now. What more do you want me to do on back to basics for theory? So all that we thought about was the key why question, because we always talk about how important why is. So we thought, well, is social work theory really essential? That was the question for tonight's back to basics webinar. You've all tuned in expecting about an hour's length of time, but really there's the answer. Good night. I mean, that's it, isn't it? There's not much more that we need to say to, is theory really essential in social work, other than yes. It is essential. It may not, that might not be what you want to hear. You might want to hear, no, it's okay. If you're struggling with theory, you can let it go. You can ignore it, but you can't. It's essential. It's really important in social work practice. Now, I use this framework all of the time. As you'll know, I've talked about it so many times in this webinar, these webinars, but the what, why, how framework. So whenever we are working with somebody as a social worker, we ought to be able to, in our own minds, think about very clearly, able to articulate what's happening for this person. Why has this situation come about? Why am I working with them? How am I going to work with them to bring about change or improved outcomes, or even to bring maintenance, if that's what's important, to maintain the situation? So we should be able to answer that question, what, why, and how, all of the time. My view is that the why question has been falling off the agenda for lots of social workers. And we know that why is disappearing from social work because serious case reviews tell us that. Serious case reviews talk about a loss of professional curiosity, which essentially is a loss of why. When you lose why, your practice becomes managerial, your practice becomes proceduralized. For me, the why is the most important question you can ask of yourself. Why is where theory happens. Why is where reflection takes place. It's the most important question that you can ask of yourself, or you can ask of colleagues. It's not necessarily a question that I'd be asking of the people that we seek to support, because it could come across as being quite an aggressive question or a problematic question. But it's a question that we should be asking of ourselves. That why question is essential. It's where theory happens. It's where reflection happens. So, of course, the real question isn't really, is theory essential? Is it really essential in social work? Partly because that's a closed question. The real question, and the question which is an open question, is why is theory essential in social work? If we wanted to do a whole webinar on is theory essential in social work, you've either got yes, no, or I don't know. I mean, literally, that's it. It's a closed question. We've opened the question up when we ask why is theory essential in social work. You know, if you've heard me talk about the importance of this why question before, Simon Sinek's Golden Circle, which is a theory drawn out of leadership. It's taken from Simon Sinek's approach to leadership, which he calls entire leadership. And he says the golden circle of why sits in the center of the what and the how. He's talking about organizations. He says every organization knows what they do. Some organizations know how they do it, but very few know why they do it. And it's referred to as the golden question, that why, the golden circle. Often people think that why is a silly question. People will say to me, oh, I don't ask why because I think that people will judge me. You know, maybe I should know why. And if I ask why, it's a silly question. One thing is there's no such thing as a silly question. But actually, I would describe why as, and this is maybe showing my age now, the $1 million question. I think that's probably a phrase that was used when I used to want to stay up late and watch the $1 Million Man. When I was a kid, the $1 million question is a phrase that's used to describe a really important question, but equally a question that's difficult to answer. And why is very often a $1 million question. Why is not a stupid question, it's a $1 million one, because why is often really hard to answer. It's the one that's really difficult to answer. So it is a really important question. And so that's what we're going to look at tonight. The question, our golden question, our $1 million question, if you like, is why? Why is theory essential in social work? And on the same slide, the answer is really because theory helps us to understand why. It's all connected around the why. Why is it important? Because theory helps us understand why. All of it is connected around the why. Really, in social work practice, then theory helps us to understand. It's a way of understanding people and their. So attachment theory gives us a way of understanding people, gives us a way of describing people's behaviours and thinking about the impact of those behaviours on relationships and so on. So theory gives us a way of understanding people. Theory is really something that can guide our thinking, or it can guide our way of seeing the world. So it's all about how we see things, how we see people, how we see things, how we see situations. It gives us a way of describing common occurrences, common behaviours, common situations. Really, that is all that theory is. It's a way of describing things that within society happen on more than one occasion. These are things that happen regularly. And so theory is a way of describing that and explaining why that happens and maybe predicting what might happen next. Theory in its wider sense, when we think about models, or what some people refer to as theory to intervene, but I would describe as models, that also gives us an idea about what works in practice. So, that's why it's important, because it helps us to understand why, but it also, because in Simon Sinek's golden circle, the why sits inside the other two questions of the what and how, the why, it also gives us ideas about what works and how to do it. So the why actually is a thread that sits through all of those questions, what, why, and how. So that's a starting point as to why theory is essential. We've got lots more ideas tonight, but because tonight is a team-led session, then often the team will suggest things. So in the WhatsApp group on the weekend, when I'm putting the slides together, I ask the team and they come up with ideas. And tonight it's all been thrown a little bit because some of the people who came up with ideas haven't been able to get here because work's running late. But some of the people who came up with ideas are here. And so I'm going to hand over to Kelly to start off with. So Kelly, your ideas around why theory is essential. I've summarised there what you said in the WhatsApp group. So maybe you want to expand a bit.
Brilliant. Thank you, Siobhan. Yeah, so when Siobhan said, why do we think theory is important? It's really difficult to answer because it's a really simple question, but it's quite a difficult one to answer. A bit like saying, is theory important? Like, yes, like you need to go a bit more into it than that, don't you? So for me, being a qualified worker now, I've kind of come to learn that theory is really important to see what's happening from different viewpoints. Because if you're new to a situation or a particular piece of work or a particular style of working, you only see it the way you see it. And they tell you that at uni, you see it through the lens of your upbringing and your situation and your life, and that makes sense. I don't think anybody would disagree with that. That makes sense, but it doesn't become real until you're in a real situation. So I know I can only see things the way I see things, but for me, I use theory to check what the other viewpoints might be, because you can only imagine what other people are thinking, and it's not really a good idea to be asking the person in the situation, why is this happening? So theory for me gives me a way to kind of check what the other viewpoints might be. And instead of kind of standing back and saying, well, let's see what happens with this person, how this ends up, you don't want it to fall apart. You want to be supportive, and using theory gives you a way of checking what might have happened in similar situations. It provides a framework of how to intervene if you feel you need to intervene, if the person wants you to intervene, what might happen if the situation carries on as it is, what might happen if you do particular things, and what might happen next. So until you've played those scenarios through of what could possibly happen and what could this lead to and what might help, in the real world, you wouldn't know any of those answers. But for me, the framework that theory gives is that playing through of the situations. Because if something similar has happened before, then you can have a choice of interventions and a choice of things that might support that person. And then obviously there's what that person brings to the situation. If they bring something else, another angle on it, then theory, gives you a real kind of safe space to explore that, whether it's with your practice educator, with your colleagues, just on your own, doodling, drawing spider diagrams or whatever. It gives you a really safe space to explore that, because that, we are working with people, real people with real lives in real situations. So for me, it gives me a real safe space to check all that out. So that's why it's important to me.
I really like hearing that, Kelly, actually. And what are you, a month into your first job as a registered social worker, something like that, within your first month, are you now? Yeah. And so just hearing you talk about what you were learning at university and how you now see that in practice is really great, to see that connectivity between what you've learned at university and what you're now taking into your qualified career, I think is really fabulous. So thank you for sharing that. That was great. Okay, so let's carry on with why we think theory is essential in social work. I mean, another really simple reason, and I suppose connecting it into all of the other webinars that we've done, is we did a webinar a couple of weeks ago on decision making, didn't we? And confident decision making. And we talked about how theory is one of the branches of the decision making tree. If you were at that session, you'll remember. So theory can help us to explain why we're doing what we're doing. Theory can help us, if you like, create defensible decisions, because when we have created a decision, when we've reached a decision, if somebody asks us, why have you reached that decision? We need to be able to say more than, well, that's what's happening. We need to be able to explain why we think that's what's happening and the different perspectives that Kelly's just talked about. So theory is essential just as part of our decision making, part of our explanation of decisions and creating defensible decisions. If you want to go right back in history, then I think you pronounce it Confucius, don't you? So the ancient philosopher apparently said, knowledge without practice is useless, and practice without knowledge is dangerous. I think that's a fabulous way of thinking about theory. And over the years that I've been doing a lot of work on social work theory, I have seen that phrase slightly altered for different contexts. So Leonardo da Vinci, who clearly wasn't talking about social work because he came before social work did, but he said, apparently, that practice without theory is like sailing an uncharted sea. Basically, you've got no idea where you're going. But theory without practice is like not bothering to set sail at all. You can have the most fabulous boat with all the best navigation equipment, but you've never ever gone anywhere in it. And I think that's a really good way of thinking about, theory without practice and practice without theory. But there's other couple of ways. I've seen it in the world of construction. I've heard the phrase used, theory without practice is pointless and practice without theory is dangerous. That's going right back to the Confucius stuff. And the final one that I've heard is in the business world, where in the business world, they say theory without practice is useless and practice without theory is expensive. You might know that in the business world, they're going to talk about money. But I suppose the reason that I'm sharing that with you and saying that to you now is we've started to talk to you about why we think theory is essential. But I'd like to know from you, how might we put that in social work? So in social work, if we were to say theory without practice is what? And practice without theory is what? If we put it in the social work context. So I've just given it you from the construction context, the business context, right back to art and engineering from Leonardo da Vinci. How would we put it in the social work context? I'd like you to all have a think about that, put it into the chat, and I'd like the team, guys, I didn't tell you this earlier, I'd like you to pick it out if you see any of those, and then later on, some of you can feed those back if you could. Okay, so we're on this little exploration because we need to go beyond the 5 minutes of yes, as the answer to this question. So we're continuing to explore why theory is essential in social work. You might ask, okay, well, theory, model, method, approach, is it all essential then? Have we got to use all of that? And you have, because when we say theory is essential in social work, what we're actually meaning is the whole lot. We're using the word theory as an umbrella term to cover theories, models, methods, and approaches. And I know I've spoken a lot about these at the different webinars that we've done about theory, because we've done quite a number of back to basics now. But just to remind you, a theory helps us to understand. It helps us to understand situations, understand people, understand patterns. It helps understanding. So theories like attachment, othering, human growth and development, critical race theory, which has a very high political profile at the moment, Cartman's drama triangle, they're all theories. All of our human growth and development, child development theories, they all help us to understand lifespan. Group dynamics helps us to understand how groups of people come together. Learning styles, learning theory helps us to understand how we learn, how people learn. So all of these are understanding. They aid our understanding. So really, when we did the first couple, and when Kelly talked about why she thinks theory is essential, we were really talking about theory. But then what about models? Models are essential as well, because models help us to decide how we intervene, what we actually do. So you've got the social model, the medical model, one that I think is going to be really important, and I think not enough people look at and consider when we're going into these next few months and the cost of living crisis. Please take a look at the charity model. We did talk about that in our webinar about models of disability, and we talked about the dangers of the charity model, but the charity model is going to become very significant, and we need to think about how we are drawing on charity in services in the coming months. Think about models of assessment, think about the recovery model, motivational interviewing, active support, which I think is very significant at the moment, particularly in adult social care. So crisis intervention, conflict management, all of these are about how we intervene, how we do things. And yes, that is essential, because not only do we need to be able to explain why we understand something in that way, why we think this is what's happening, why we see it in that way, as Kelly described, but we also need to be able to say, and this is why we're intervening using this technique or this intervention or this model. And of course, methods are also part of our intervention. Methods are the specific tool or technique that we actually use in our practice. The slide here says generally drawn out of a model. That's because I never like to be completely absolute about something, just in case there's an exception to the rule. But I've yet to find a method that we use as social workers that you can't trace back to a model, because we do. All of the methods come from models. Things like strengths mapping is a method that's used a lot at the moment in terms of mapping people's strengths. We've got eco maps and genograms that we use a lot as part of writing chronologies. That's a method, all part of our assessments. GEMS questions, that's a particular way of asking questions. 3 houses, the direct work tool, which is used a lot. Witches and wizards, words and pictures, they're all methods that come out of signs of safety. Direct work tools, communication methods, phatic communication, any of that, they're all methods. And yes, they are essential, because we need to know how to plan what we're going to do. We need to know what methods will put that model into practice. And then finally, an approach. The approach is our overall way of going about something. Really important when you think about the political instability in the UK at the moment, that we understand that the approach that we want to take might be in conflict with the political approach of the day or with the organisational approach. Austerity is going to continue, and it might even up a pace. Think about the impact of that on our work. We might want to be incredibly relationship based in the work that we do, but actually in the organisations, with the funding that we have, with episodic working techniques, we may not be able to do that. So sometimes the approach we want to take isn't always the approach that we are enabled to take. Approaches are essential though, and an understanding of approaches is essential. It flavors everything that you do. And really it's the approach that makes you that unique worker, and we'll look at that a little bit more as other team members start to contribute this evening. So when Kelly was talking, Kelly talked about, you know, the way in which we might need to change things, or we might need to look at why are we doing this, and then we can change it if it's not working. So I think if we put all of those things together, we put an approach, a theory, a model, and a method, and we connect all of those together in the way that we've been encouraging you to do through this webinar series. I think if you put all that together, then you know if something isn't working, you know what to do about it. Because if something isn't working in practice and you don't know why you did it or where that idea came from, you can't change it or adapt it because it's your only way of seeing things and you're left confused. If something isn't working, you can go back to the start. You can think, do you need to change your approach to this situation? Maybe it's your approach that's not working here. Maybe you need to change your way of understanding it, the lens that you're looking through, as Kelly described it. Maybe you need to change your choice of theory that's helping you to understand the situation. Perhaps the model that you're using isn't helpful, so maybe you need to change the model. Maybe there might be a different method that could be better in this situation. But if you're able to be articulate about, here's my approach, my theory, my model, and my method, if it doesn't work, you can change it. If you're not able to articulate it, you can't change it because you don't know what else to do. You're being overly practical. And so we're going to go on at this point to Chris's thoughts. Now, I think Chris's thoughts tie in with this because it's that whole thing about that being sort of just practical and just seeing and just doing. I thought connected into what you shared in the WhatsApp group at the weekend, Chris. So we'll see if you, as you expand on your thoughts in the WhatsApp group, let's see if it does connect.
Yeah, thanks, Siobhan. For me, I mean, a lot of people will know I kind of came at social work a bit backwards because I worked in a team in an unqualified post for a long time before I actually did my training. So I had lots of practice experience, but I didn't really have the theory or the understanding to back it up. And when people said to me, oh, you know, what theories are you using? When I started my training, I was definitely that rabbit in headlights. And it was like, oh my God, because to me, the things that I was doing and the reasons that I was doing them just actually felt like common sense. And I was like, but surely that's just common sense that we would do that. And it was only when I started to learn a bit more about theories and what they could bring and understand that why something might be happening and what we could do to change it by bringing together all the things that Siobhan's just talked about, that I was able to see actually how much more ability to influence a situation that might give us, because we could understand it better and we could take the learning from other people and from other situations and we could build on that, and we could, you know, we could look at the things that research has brought us which have led to theories and kind of go, okay, so this is why these particular thoughts are there on a subject, and so this is how we can maybe change things and influence them. And it's really brought a whole new dimension to my work and to my understanding. And you know, I'm able to pull on the details now and to understand why we look at things in a particular way and why we might use a particular model and why things are important, because that means I can work with people in a different way. So that's kind of it really for me. It's fairly sort of simple and straightforward, but you don't really realise if you don't have those foundations, which is what all that theoretical learning gives you, how much of an impact it can have.
And I love that. And I love listening to you, Chris, because, you know, when we started the webinars, and number 98 now, when we started the webinars, you were a student, and now we're on number 98 and you're now a practice educator. So it shows how long we've been doing it, but also demonstrates that movement in you.
Yeah, definitely.
But
you know, I still feel like that sometimes. I still get that rabbit in headlights thing sometimes, because I'm like, and I doubt myself and I go, oh, do I really know that? You know, and And I have to go back and check myself, make sure.
I think that rabbit in the headlights that we're going to look at towards the end of it, I think everybody feels that sometimes.
Absolutely.
So, you know, wherever we are on our theory journey.
But actually, I think that's important, because people need to know that that's okay. Because, you know, you can go and look things up, can't you? And check.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think if you are, you know, I think that uncertainty, that professional humility, it's all important stuff, isn't it, that we talk about a lot. Okay, thank you for that, Chris. Okay, so a little bit more as to why we think that theory is important. So, you know, we've tried to build on theories about how we see things and understand things. So it's important. Theories, models, methods, approaches are about what we do and how we do it. So that's important. But also, I think that it's important for us to recognise that theory can help us to contextualise our practice. When we've previously talked about the envelope activity, and those of you who've got the Social Work Theory smartphone app probably use the envelope activity. If you don't, I'd suggest you use the envelope activity because it can be very helpful for you. But the envelope activity asks you, where do you work? And that's because where you work has just as much influence on what you do as the people that you're working with. And that context of organizational practice, and the fact that, you know, we do, a lot of students say, oh, I'm not into politics, I'm not interested in politics. Well, you need to be if you're a social worker, because social work is political and we will be influenced by political change. And so understanding the context of practice is really important. There are, you know, particular theories and models in particular areas of practice. So that can help you to contextualize what area of practice you're working in. There's particular models and methods of intervention that are particular in certain contexts. You know, the Welsh context, the Northern Irish context, quite different to the English and Scottish context, and that's all within the UK. You go outside of that, there are even more different models and methods. So understanding that can help us to contextualize our practice. Now, at this point, I thought, let's introduce a theory, because tonight we're talking theoretically about why theory is important. But what about a theory? And I was thinking, well, what theories haven't we covered on the webinars? You know, we're up to number 98. We've done a lot of theory. We've covered a lot of models and methods. But what we haven't talked about specifically is McDonaldization theory. And actually, I think that's going to be very relevant for us over the coming months. So it's something it's worth you taking a look at. George Ritzer wrote McDonaldization theory in the 1990s. Now, when he wrote it, it was, I suppose, quite forward thinking, really, because in the early 1990s, you didn't find that fast food was literally everywhere. Where it is now, it's on every corner in, you know, in every town. But Ritzer was writing about, it's a sociological theory of organizations. And prior to that, George Ritzer said, look, all of the organizational theory that we learned was based on car manufacturing. And it was, I remember doing a module at university, and I qualified before Ritzer developed this, but I did a module at university called Working in Organizations. And we learned some organizational theory, and it was stuff like Fordism and Weberism, and it was all based on manufacturing. And George Ritzer said, look, forget that. Car manufacturing's had its day in terms of being the most influential type of organization. He said, look, the fast food industry is going to be the big featured organization in the future, the one that's going to have the most influence. It's the fast food industry. And he said there are five major features of the fast food industry, and he said they are going to permeate society generally. And he wrote this book called The McDonaldization of Society. Now, I don't think it could have been Kentucky Fried Chickenization or Subwayization or Burger Kingization. It's not specifically about McDonald's, it's about the fast food industry. I suppose maybe McDonaldization had a better ring to it, I don't know, than the others. And he said, essentially, there are these five things that are features of the fast food industry, which have now become a key part of society. First of all, he said, look, The fast food industry really focuses on efficiency. How quickly can you get something done? Not how well is it done, but how quickly, how rapidly is it done? How cost efficient is it? Not how well it's done, but efficiency. And he said the fast food industry focus in on calculability. What can be calculated becomes the most important thing. He says, and I'm just thinking about when this goes on YouTube, I don't want to be sued by any of the fast food industry, you know, but when the fast food industry, they don't try and sell you burgers by saying this is the best burger you're ever going to eat, but they'll say it's a 99p menu, or it weighs 4 ounces, or you'll get it in 3 minutes. It's all about what can be calculated, and that becomes the main focus. Fast food industry, it's very predictable. Wherever you're in the world you go, you've got a similar menu, maybe with a couple of tweaks, but very similar menu. A lot of the restaurants, they all look the same. It's very predictable. There's an increased control of staff within the fast food industry. So, you know, the whole thing about you've got to say, do you want to go large on that? You have to act in certain ways and say certain things when the mystery shopper comes in, or you get a gold star taken off your badge and all that. And the replacement of humans with technology. I've not been in a McDonald's for years, but when you walk through service stations, I see like really young little children who can press the button, you know, they just press a touch screen to order their own food kind of thing, because there's just a replacement now of humans with technology. And in the 1990s, that's what George Ritzer said was going to start to permeate society. Now, some people are looking at this in terms of, it first came into the UK, really, you could hear a lot of talk about the McDonaldization of education, then the McDonaldization of the health service, and now the McDonaldization of social work. So you could look at social work and McDonaldization and think about social work, which is McDonaldized, features a de-skilling of the social work role, a narrowing of the social work function, highly prescriptive procedures, a dependence on technology, and a focus on cost containment and measurement. Now, in lots of ways, some contemporary social work is a bit like that. One of the things that I think can be really helpful for students is to take a look at the 5 principles of McDonaldization theory. Take a look at it, even develop a bit of a grid. What does each of those 5 principles mean? And to what extent can you see that in your placement organization? And to what extent can you see social workers trying to challenge that in the organization, trying not to be McDonaldized? And so understanding theories around organizations can be really helpful. It can help you to position yourself. It can help you to connect social work and politics. And so hopefully taking a look at that theory might have helped an understanding of how it can help us understand our context. And so we're going to hand over now to Kultuma, and she's going to maybe fill us in a little bit on what she put into the WhatsApp group. Kultuma, I felt like yours fitted in here because of that whole thing about McDonaldization, everybody being seen as the same, everything being done the same. I felt that what you said in the WhatsApp group fitted in there, kind of challenged McDonaldization a bit.
Yeah. So my thoughts on theory were, obviously in uni you're always taught between the, you know, to differentiate between the medical model and the social model, and for me I felt that theory it's more of the social model. It's not prescriptive like the medical model. Yes, there's so many different theories and you can pick them off the shelf and decide which one fits best, but equally that theory can be adapted to meet each individual. And I quite like that about the theories, and I think it's really important that yes, you're using a theory as a bit of a baseline, but it's how you adapt it to sort of understand each person on an individual basis. And I read in the chat as well, I think it was Denise that had said it depends on what theory is taught. Yes, in uni I did find that, you know, you're taught like the staple theories like the attachment theory, systems theory, and the person-centered, but there's so many theories out there, and it's about educating yourself, I think, as well. And I know Dave's linked the theory cards in the chat, and that I felt was an invaluable resource for me as a student and now while I'm practicing, because there's so many theories in there that I'd never even heard of at university. And I think, actually, this fits really nicely with what I'm dealing with at work. And I can sort of adapt it to meet that individual and understand that individual situation much better, and think, well, actually, I can try this or I can try that with them. And it's about how you utilize it. Whereas with the medical model, it's literally, you've got a headache, take this painkiller, and that's how it works. Whereas with theory, because there's so many, you can always sort of link it back to various different ones and try different angles. And like Kelly said, it's looking at it through different lenses, and there's so many lenses that you can look through. But you've got to sort of find that knowledge. If your university is not providing it, there's a wealth of resources out there that you can gain it from. So
fabulous. Yeah, fabulous. Thanks, Untitled. You're right. It's that whole variety. It's one of the things that really excites me about social work theory is there's so much of it. We don't have to just be McDonaldized in our choice of theory. And because theory is about our thinking, nobody can tell us how to think. Nobody can prescribe that. So it opens things out for us, I think, in ways that can be really exciting. But you're right, we're often just taught some really standardized theories, maybe the McDonaldized type theory, and maybe opening it up and enabling us to see things differently can be helpful. So yeah, the theory cards, I think it's got about 130 in the current edition, I think, something like that, hasn't it? So it shows how many theories potentially we could draw on. Fab, thank you for that, Untitled. We'll keep going with why we think theory is important. One of the things I think about theory is understanding theory, particularly models here I'm talking about, I suppose, can help us to anticipate changes to the profession or changes in our practice. When you look at what's coming, you know, what's the next big theory, what's the next big idea, because you can see over time the way that some theories have very much gone out of fashion. They come back in again sometimes they're called something different when they come back around, and those of you who've been qualified a long time will know that. But then it's also about seeing new things and new ideas that are coming along, and I think looking in different countries and different contexts, as we've just said, at what's working there and what we might be able to draw on here. So it can help us to anticipate changes in our practice. I also think that understanding theory can help us to question and challenge. And that's a key part of being a social worker, is questioning and challenging. We know the 4D2P model, which is very new, which Prospero Tedham developed, and we've had a whole webinar on, talks about the importance of disruption. That fourth D is all about disruption, and that's what social work is about. What I think is great about Prospero's 4D2P model is it really demonstrates the difference between being non-oppressive and being anti-oppressive. We can all be non-oppressive, but it's the anti-oppressive stuff that really matters. It's how have you challenged this? How have you changed this? How have you really disrupted what's become normalized within social work practice? So I think that that's really important. Sometimes, in my experience, some employers have said, oh, we're bringing in this particular way of working, you know, this particular new model or this particular approach. And sometimes I look at it and I think, well, no, you've not brought that approach in. You've only brought a little bit of that approach in. You've only brought the bit in that works for you. What about all the other part of that approach that's really important? So I think if you understand the theory, so you know the approach, then you can question, well, hold on, what about this part that's not being used? Or hang on, what about that part? So I think that's a key thing about being a professional within an organization. Being an employee means you simply take what you're given. Being a professional means that you question and challenge. And theory can help us to do that. And it is your use of theory that makes you a unique practitioner. It is that bit about nobody can tell us how to think. It makes you a unique practitioner. And this is where I'm going to hand over to David, who was, this is what you put into the WhatsApp group. So if you want to add a little bit, David, and you've put an image with it as well, which is always lovely.
Yep, so that is me being very vain. With regards to theory, we were talking about struggles and challenges of it, and I really struggle with theory because there's so many choices. Like Siobhan says, there's a lot of them that are kind of core, like attachment and person-centered, and they're kind of get used up every day. But there's so many other ones that are very, very helpful, but I get bogged down by them because I can't quite pick out which one is most relevant. Like I say here, different ways that they can be applied, and not to mention how subjective they are, can be, like, it's obviously up to you and how you apply them in your practice. But I feel they're very briefly touched on in school or university, and then you're left to figure it all out by yourself. So yeah, I think that's where my head goes with the struggles. Could you hit the next one, please, Siobhan? Chris Whitty. But, and here we go with the positives, but I also know it's essential because it supports us as workers and as supporting people to work in a tailored way to each person, so that we're not just going attachment theory will fit all of you, or relationship-based practice will help these people here, because it won't always work. So I think the brilliant thing about the wide array of theory is that it allows us to tailor our approach. And that little woman there is Siobhan with her theory cards, making up an approach for someone she's working with. So like we've been saying in the chat, there's no one size fits all in social work, and everything is unique. Every approach is unique. Every person we work with is unique, and every thought process we have to support them is unique. So don't write off theory, even though it can be quite a heavy subject, quite a hard subject, because you may not get your head around it, but you will get there. Like Siobhan says, like Kelly says, and Chris, like, once you're doing it, it just starts to roll. Now that I'm in my final year placement, I'm doing the theory without understanding I'm doing the theory. I'm talking about it, and it's taking my practice educator to show me that I'm talking about it, but I'm applying it. So it will come with time, and it's very important.
Thank you, Dave. I'm very flattered that the picture is me. I didn't know it was me when you sent it me. I just thought it was a social worker looking at a scenario. So thank you very much that you've drawn the picture of me. It's great. I suppose what I was thinking though, Dave, when you put that into the WhatsApp group at the weekend, I was thinking, well, this is just a completely an illustration of why theory is important, because it is what makes us unique professionals. And whenever we have an A to Z, or whenever we have a team-led webinar, Dave, your bit in the WhatsApp group when we're putting it together is always about personalization and being unique and challenging a one-size-fits-all kind of thing. And I was thinking, so that's what makes you a unique professional. It's what makes you unique, isn't it? It's that personalization. And even what you've put in here is personalization to a T, isn't it? It's about not taking a one-size-fits-all and taking that unique approach. So thank you for that. Okay, we're going to continue to look at why theory is important. And we started off saying, oh, look, it's one slide, we're finished. And now we're trying to fit it all into an hour because there's so much to do, to get through. But theory in social work is also essential because it helps us to be clear within collaborative practice. So when we're working with other professionals and we need to explain what we're doing or why we think something or why we see it in that way, theory really helps us to do that. It gives us a knowledge base that says, look, this is going beyond my gut instinct and my feeling as an individual. This is based on my professional knowledge base. This is the profession of social work. And this is why I see it in this way. So I think it's particularly important when we're working collaboratively. It's also, and you may not feel this at the moment, you know, like Dave said, still struggling and still trying to find a way of feeling confident, more confident about the use of theory. But actually, understanding and using theory in practice can improve our professional confidence and, I think, improves job satisfaction. I regularly deliver training for very experienced social workers. I did a session yesterday on revisiting the social work theory base as a refresher. And at the end of the day, people said that has been so helpful at taking me back to my core. I've really enjoyed it. I've really found revisiting the why I am a social worker. And that's what theory helps us to do. So it gives us an improved job satisfaction, an improved sense of who we are and why we do what we do. So don't let go of theory. I think one of the things that can happen is you just get to the point that Dave's getting to now, where you're like, yes, okay, I understand the theory now and I can see it being used in practice. And then we stop talking about it when we qualify. Why? Don't let go of theory. Keep it on your professional agenda. And so trying to put everything together that we've said tonight, when we ask the question, is theory really essential in social work? Yes, it is, because it helps us to make sense. Helps us to make sense of people, of situations, of behaviours, of patterns, of organisations, helps us to make sense of all kinds of things. It helps us to anticipate changes to practice and to the wider profession. It helps us to justify and explain our practice. It gives us increased confidence, helps to contextualise practice. It helps us to challenge practice and process. It gives more direction in our work and enables us to redirect our work when it isn't going as we'd hoped. It's good for collaborative practice, it increases job satisfaction, and it's a key part of the professionalisation agenda. So it is important. So we started off by saying yes. I'm going to kind of not quite conclude yet, but we're going to kind of conclude with, okay, there's other ways of saying yes. You can say absolutely okay, all right, of course, agreed, whatever it is that you want to say. Theory is important. But I wanted to revisit this, which is a slide that we had a couple of weeks ago. It's attributed to Carl Jung. I've read around it. I'm not totally certain that he said it, although it is attributed to him, but it's a fabulous quote anyway. Know all the theories, master all the techniques, but as you touch a human soul, be just another human soul. So theory matters, but soul really matters too. But in some ways, I think it is social work theory that gives us our professional soul. And so it helps us to create those connections. There's another quote that I came across recently. I saw it on Twitter and I couldn't attribute it because it was one of those, things that just pops up and you can't attribute it anywhere. But the quote was, we don't need unity in theory, we need solidarity in practice. And I think it was actually talking about what's going on politically at the moment in the UK. But actually, if you take it out of that context and apply it into thinking about social work theory, one of the things that the team members have said tonight, and the couple of team members who haven't been able to get here were going to say, there's so much theory, sometimes we find it too much and a bit overwhelming. We don't need to cut down on the theory. Sometimes people say, let's just have less theory, and then it's clearer. We don't need a unity in our thinking. We don't have to think in the same way. We don't have to intervene in the same way, but we do need solidarity in practice at the moment. Now more than ever before, what we need is a solidarity in practice that is based on values, that is based on challenging the austerity, that is looking to the future and the really difficult things that we're going to face over the coming months. We need solidarity together, and theory can help us provide that. So earlier on, I started off with that whole idea of Confucius, and theory without practice is what, and practice without theory is what. This is what I came up with. I don't know if it kind of makes sense, but I was thinking about theory without practice is dull. There's no point to it. It is a bit dull, but practice without theory is completely managerial, heartless even. Practice without theory is heartless, it's soulless, it doesn't have that heart and soul that we need to bring. But theory that's just taught in a very dull, boring way without the connection to practice is dull. So was there anything else put into the chat, guys? Let's see if the team want to tell me about, did anybody in the chat go for how they would complete that sentence. Theory without practice is, or practice without theory is. Anybody tell me something in the chat earlier? It would have been earlier on. Did anybody pick it up? I did say at the time, no.
Mainly just me spouting nonsense, Siobhan. Mainly just me spouting that absolute rubbish. But like,
Okay.
there was
No,
a few people.
there were some things. There were some things.
There were some things, you just didn't catch them at the time. I'm
Yeah.
sure there were some things.
There were some things about theory. Practice without theory is theory without practice is just knowledge, and not practice without theory is dangerous. I'm looking at you, Kultuma, because I know you said that, and then the person underneath you said something really similar. You must have typed it at the same time. But
Theory
basically
without
saying,
practice is knowledge. Practice without theory is a gamble on someone's life.
yeah. So basically, it's just knowledge. It's not useful at all, ranging from not useful to really dangerous.
And I've just put one in that I thought was absolute nonsense, but I like it anyway. Theory without practice is like having bricks without a middle, and practice without theory is like building a wonky wall. So absolute stupid, but I like it.
I like this one from, I can see from Michelle earlier, practice without theory is disrespectful to service users, and it absolutely is. And I think that's really important, is completely disrespectful. And so if we want to act in a way which is values based, then I think it's really important. So, oh, and I like Ellie's here. It's a bit late, but theory is a bit like Hansel and Gretel's crumbs, allowing us to work our way back to where we started and examine the path that we took. That's fabulous. That's a lovely visual image, because I do like that. So thank you for that then, sharing those things. When I was putting it together, the slides at the weekend, then I was looking for some images that sort of said yes. And when I did a bit of a search on yes images, this came up. But I looked at this, I thought it's a lovely little image, but it looks like, yeah, okay, all right then. Looks like I don't really believe you, but I'm just going to agree with you for the sake of it. And I did think there's probably an element of that to some of the people in the webinar, thinking, all right then, yeah, it's important. But if you're really struggling with it, and people do, we know that people do, keep going. It is important. It is essential. We have done so many webinars about this. Watch back webinar number 1, the theory fear factor, where we talked about why people struggle with theory. So in many ways, what we've done is almost come full circle, because the very first webinar that we did was, why do people struggle with use of theory in practice? And now we're looking at, why is it important that we do it? So go back and rewatch that if you've not watched it. It's available on YouTube. And also webinar 17, the theory picnic, which I think is our most watched back webinar actually. But that one goes through some really basic techniques about how you might connect theory with your practice. So the theory fear factor, Chris mentioned earlier, looking like a terrified rabbit caught in the headlights when asked about what theory are you using there. But actually, as we've gone through these webinars, number 98 now, we've introduced to you in the Back to Basics sessions so many different things about how theory can be connected with your practice. We've talked about the theory tree. We did that in webinar number 17, the theory picnic, where we looked at how do you decide on approach, theories, models, methods, and connect it to practice and build a tree around it. We've talked about head, heart and hands. We called that building a body of social work theory. And that's another technique that you can use. I think particularly, that's probably my favorite technique for use. The envelope activity, we've talked about that. I would encourage everybody to use an envelope activity. Again, that was in webinar number 17, what that looks like. I think we actually applied it to Bart Simpson, as I remember. I think the team got us doing that. Objects, the use of objects to describe a social work theory. So, for example, just finding an object and then thinking about what theory does that relate to. If you follow me on Twitter, you'll know that during August, I posted a photo every day and said, what theory is this photograph? And that was just a good way of getting people to think about and talk about theory. Reimagining theory. We've talked about the need to reimagine theory in the light of the really extensive changes to social work practice that have taken place across the last couple of years since the impact of COVID. So reimagine theory now. We need to reimagine some of the stuff we've been drawing on forever. It doesn't mean it's no good if it's been around a long time. I've been around social work for a long time. I think I'm still all right. It's not a problem that it's been around a long time. The problem is when it's not kept up to date. So Erickson's 8 ages, okay, just be really clear about when was that written. He talks about people going at 60 into the final stages of integrity versus despair. I'm not terribly far away from that, and I'm guaranteeing you I'm not going into integrity versus despair in a couple of years' time. The thing is that people live longer now than when he wrote it. So we need to think about and reimagine theory in new ways of working. And finally, YouTube. 3 years ago, I was trying to look at what is there on social work theory on YouTube, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing. There were a little bit about American, very Americanized, pretty much nothing in the UK. Now there's loads of stuff. School of Shabs, there's Kaylee Rose Evans, there's Sociable Social Worker, there's loads of stuff. And there's our channel with all of these webinars on. There is no reason that you're not going to be able to access stuff about social work theory on YouTube. And it spells out the word theory. So look, perfect, works really well. We've only got 2 webinars left. We are very much hoping that lots of you will join us next week when we are giving advice to my younger social work self. We're going for a world record with 99 different social workers contributing their ideas and their advice to their younger self. If you've not yet submitted your advice to your younger self, please send it to us. Send it, the team will put the email address in the chat now. Email us your advice to your younger self, maybe with a picture of you on your younger self. You can do it if you're a student. What advice would you have given yourself when you started the course, even if you're only 6 months into your course? It's just looking back. I'm going to give advice to myself at the point of graduation 32 years ago. It can be anything that you want to give. And then our final A to Z session on the 9th of November. Just 2 sessions left. We do hope that you'll join us for those sessions. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. We hope you got something from it, and we hope that you are now in agreement with us that yes, social work theory is essential in practice. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Good night. See you again soon. Bye.